An early pre-training camp look at fantasy wide receiver rankings. Where are the tiers? Who are the undervalued starting caliber fantasy wide receivers in 2025 on today's Peacock and Williamson?
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Love our everydayers. Thanks for hanging with us and getting ready for 2025, talking a little bit more about fantasy and wide receivers. And it's a two-parter. There's too many wide receivers, too many good receivers, too many sleepers. We're going to have to break this up into a couple episodes. So more of the sleepery episode in part 2. We're going to talk about the stalwarts and those early round targets and maybe some even over and undervalued targets in the early rounds of fantasy drafts as we look at the rankings for 2025. So make sure you're subscribed up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. And if you're new to the program, welcome. We appreciate you and get involved in our mailbags as well. Hit us up on Twitter at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Drop a comment or a question on YouTube. In today's episode, brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just go to FanDuel.com. So, Tier 1. And we're going to take a look at the PFF fantasy rankings here. But
yeah, just as a guideline, you know.
The guideline was more about how we rank these and how we would change what we're seeing here with ADPs. And so referencing PFF rankings and tiers and some ESPN ADPs right now. And everybody in the world thinks that the top wide receivers are Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, but I'm seeing a little bit of a difference of opinion, Matt, in maybe wide receiver 3, which is a little bit surprising. So,
yeah,
as it pertains to what wide receiver 1, like top tier wide receiver, how big is this tier for you? Is it just Chase and Jefferson? Is it Chase and Jefferson and one of the other 2 wide receivers that I'm seeing put in a tier like this? PFF has Puka Nacua as wide receiver 3 in that tier. With the top 2 guys, generally ADP has CeeDee Lamb going higher and kind of in that tier of number 1 wide receivers, and Puka Nacua maybe going a little bit after CeeDee Lamb. How do you see it at the top, and how would you rank those guys?
To me, tier 2 is really strong. I mean, there's a ton of receivers. I mean, the guys we're talking about are going to be all stars, you know, on today's show. But to me, I think it has to be Chase and Jefferson alone in tier 1. Let's just start there. I prefer Chase after the season he came off. He's got the better quarterback. But Jefferson averages like the most receiving yards in NFL history. You know, it's not like I have any qualms about him at all. Would you take Chase over Jefferson as well?
You know, I think it's going to be year to year and things will be different.
Yeah.
Jamar Chase was so ridiculous last year, 127 catches, 1,700 yards, and then the 17 touchdowns.
Yeah,
which, you know, nearly doubles most other good wide receivers. The next closest was McLaurin at 13. St. Brown had 12. Justin Jefferson had 10 touchdowns. So that's a huge difference. And so he was wide receiver 1 by a lot, averaged over 100 yards per game, which is kind of crazy. And I don't see any reason why the Bengals are not going to have to just chuck the heck out of it again this year.
Yeah, I'd say their only real path to winning is through the air. Yeah, and at least Minnesota has. You know, they can run the ball a little bit better. There's more weapons in Minnesota, and they actually have a defense. So that's a difference to me, and plus the Burrow factor. So those 2 stand alone for me. Now, it just so happens, total coincidence, that I was reading some fantasy stuff and kind of cut and pasted some stats I saw about the Rams last night. I didn't even know we were going to have this conversation today. But I understand the love for Nacua. Trust me. I mean, I think he's an underrated football player. I think he's definitely a top 10 receiver. I love the way he plays. Durability worries me. And he also will do like fullback blocking at times. You know, him and Kupp throw their body around. So that concerns me. That's why he's not 3 for me. But I was pretty blown away by these 2 stats that I threw out there. So the bottom line is McVay throws the ball to the wide receivers more than any team in the league. So the Rams have been first in wide receiver target share in 3 of the last 4 seasons. Percentage of targets that go to each position. They're number 1 3 of the last 4 years. And in turn, we should have brought this up maybe when we were talking about running backs. They're dead last in target share to running backs in 4 of the last 6 years. And then the other 2 years, they were 31st and 30th. So, all the balls go to 2 receivers. So this is more of an Adams thing to me when we get to him, that I don't think Adams hurts Nacua. I don't think Nacua hurts Adams. Much like Kupp and Nacua did together, the ball's going to go to those 2 a very high percentage of the time. But I just can't I'm just not as trusting of Nacua as, say, CD Lamb.
If you like Puka Nacua as much as CD Lamb, which is fine, and I would understand it, even if you haven't ranked over, then I still believe they belong at the top of the next tier rather than...
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not crossing my mind to take over Jefferson or Chase.
And look, I still think there's less of an opportunity for Puka to have as many targets this year with Davante Adams than before. So he's not going to get more targets. Right?
Agreed.
But he's already at the top. So if you filter this by yards per game, I talked about how Jamar Chase had over 100 yards per game, 100.5, most in the league last year. Justin Jefferson, number 2, 90.2. Puka Nacua is 3, even though he only played 11 games, 90 yards per game. And so
that playing 11 games thing doesn't sit great with me, though.
But he played 11 games, right?
Yeah.
And his yards per reception are lower. So they're more like CD Lamb as far as yards per reception.
Makes sense.
And I mean, Davante Adams has to be a factor because Cooper Kupp was hurt as well. And
Kupp's a shell of what he used to be too,
Right. And so less opportunity for Puka to get as many targets, even if he's still getting the full load of targets, even if the Rams are targeting wide receivers as much as always. I think their defense is better. I think that's going to shorten games a little bit, which might help or hurt the wide receivers in fantasy cases of the Rams offensive pass catchers. So they've target wide receivers so much. Is it because they don't like their tight ends? Because they drafted a tight end like they do like tight ends. They have a whole bunch of tight ends. Are they not going to get targets in the offense either? So that's
interesting to me too, because it's basically been confirmed that a year ago McVay was infatuated with Brock Bowers and did everything he possibly could to move up to get him. In this draft, they traded out of the first round, but still their first pick was a tight end. Something spinning in his head with, I got to get tight ends more involved somehow, So I just think it's a factor.
Yep. So I like Puka Nacua. I don't like the price. Jamar Chase, it's you can't pay too much. Justin Jefferson, you can't pay too much. I think you can start to pay too much for Puka Nacua and maybe even CD Lamb too, because CD Lamb, his yards per catch, 11.8. He had the same amount of targets, almost identical, same amount of targets within 1 or 2 or 3 of Justin Jefferson. Same amount of targets, same amount of receptions, except he had 400 fewer yards.
Now, he also didn't have Dak Prescott for much of the year, but he also didn't have to fight with George Pickens at all. So I'm sure Lamb will be featured basically to the same level, and Dak will create more first downs, more passing opportunities, etc. But I doubt his targets go up. I mean, Pickens is going to get his share. I still have Lamb 3.
You have Lamb 3. Do you have Puka 4? Or is there anybody else in the next tier, according to PFF, or according to Fantasy Football Drafters? Is there somebody else that belongs closer to or above Puka and closer to CD Lamb for you?
So I'm really infatuated with Malik Neighbors because it's only been 1 year, but it's still the same play callers. There's not a lot of he had like a 40% target share. I mean, like the most in the league by a really wide margin. And that was from Tommy Cutlets. I don't think Russell Wilson's great. I don't think Winston's great. I don't think Dart's great, but they're better than what they played with last year. You know what I mean? I don't need him to be Peyton Manning in his prime. If he's to get a 40% target share and get the ball thrown to him almost as much as all his other teammates combined, and he's so talented, and the ball's going to come out a little more accurate, that's a pretty good recipe, and I expect that they're going to be losing a lot.
It kind of depends on how you feel about their their quarterback situation. He had 170 targets this year, second most in the NFL.
It's crazy.
Behind Jamar Chase.
Yeah.
That was only good for 500 fewer yards than Jamar Chase, so 1,204 yards, 11 per reception. He had 7 touchdowns, 80.3 yards per game. If you're chasing target share and usage, which you should be if you're a fantasy football player,
sure,
Malik Neighbors deserves to be probably right in there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if I were to tier these, I would have Chase Jefferson, Lamb, Nacua, Neighbors.
Chase Jefferson, tier of their own. Top of tier 2, Lamb, Puka, Neighbors.
Yeah.
In a tight grouping at the top of tier 2.
And I would be borderline if St. Brown should be in tier 2 or not. Because he's gotten the point now that he's so trustworthy. I mean, like every year is exactly the same for St. Brown, and it's good.
Okay, that's a good jumping off point here.
Yeah.
Where does St. Brown belong, and where do you dive in and draft your fantasy wide receivers at the top next? Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Summer sports in full swing, and whether you're about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, maybe some high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. And yeah, of course, you can still bet on NFL football. Tons of weekly lines already up at FanDuel for the 2025 NFL season. Bet on your favorite team to win the Super Bowl. So many 2025 NFL prop bets ready to go right now at FanDuel. And you're already following the action, so why not make a little money and a little more thrill in your sports viewing pleasures? How about FanDuel getting you not only before first pitch, making your bets, but during the game, live in-game parlays. Make a little money while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Actually, you can get sunburned and make money at the same time with the FanDuel app on the beach. So if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Again, new customers, $5 bet, you win that, $150 extra to play with. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Amon-Ra St. Brown. So this is kind of where we're talking about Puka Nacua. And I don't know exactly how this new offense with the Lions is going to look. I think they'll try to do a lot of very similar things. And I don't think target shares are going to go haywire or anything like that. Might they lean a little less toward the run and a little more toward the passing game? Could that even be a possibility? But it doesn't seem like the identity of the head coach, even if the offensive coordinator might be different in Detroit. But Amon-Ra St. Brown is just so solid. You don't have to worry about the injury stuff as you have with already in Puka Nacua's young career. And how many fewer targets are you actually going to get with Amon-Ra St. Brown? And if you're paying a price of, let me just double check what the ESPN ADP is here at wide receiver. So Amon-Ra St. Brown is basically top of round 2, maybe late round 1 ADP, around 12, right around the neighborhood. So clearly, Matt, I know you would go Neighbors in that situation if, let's say, you were on the turn.
The reason is I think Neighbors could be wide receiver 1. I could write that story. Yeah. I'm not sure St. Brown can.
But if you have to pay, if you can get Amon-Ra St. Brown mid round 2, but you got to pay a round 1 price on Puka Nacua, I think that's easy, and I would take Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yes, I have Nacua ahead of St. Brown, but not that big a difference, especially if that's the price points.
And I bring them up just because they're such similar players, tough guys, do the dirty work over the middle, not big yards per reception, heavily targeted and featured in their offense.
Yep. I mean, the ball's going to go their way a lot.
Yes.
When they're on the field, you're not unhappy about them in your fantasy lineup ever.
Okay. The next group of guys that are in tier 2 here for PFF, are they in your tier 2, Matt? And I'm talking about guys like Nico Collins, who's the number 7 ranked wide receiver. Brian Thomas Jr., he's the number 5 ranked receiver right now at Pro Football Focus, which is interesting. And who's the other name here? Drake London, who is another interesting name here. AJ Brown has been a stalwart for fantasy teams since he's been in the NFL. How do you like this next group of guys? Are they all tier 2 guys for you? Are you drafting them in a similar neighborhood that you're drafting the CDs and the Malik Neighbors?
Nico, yes. I think Stroud bounces back in a big way And I know they invested in wide receivers, and Kirk's also on the team. I just think he is a true alpha, and I'm not sure the whole fantasy community realizes that he's maybe a top 5 NFL wide receiver. So I have no hesitation with Nico. We'll get to Travis Hunter at some point, but I am so infatuated with Hunter that I kind of hold it against Brian Thomas. But I have nothing bad at all to say about Brian Thomas, except for I think Hunter might be his equal right off the bat. And is there enough to go around in Jacksonville?
I'm the opposite.
Okay.
I think that you're going to get a discount on Brian Thomas in some cases because of Travis Hunter, because I think that people aren't going to trust him as much. And so when we're talking about tiers and rankings is one thing, but let's go to the ADP here and tell that story. So ADP for wide receivers right now, Brian Thomas ranked 5, 7, depending on the 2 different articles you look. I think their current rankings actually had Brian Thomas Jr. at number 5. The tiers article had Brian Thomas Jr. at number 7, right in that same group with those guys. But you have to draft him 20th overall, essentially, maybe even a little bit later in your fantasy league. So I guess he's not getting much of a discount. I thought maybe he was going a little bit later than that, but still,
people love him, and I get it.
He's at the end of the top 10 instead of the middle of the top 10 where he's being ranked.
Okay,
still talented. Seeing him take off, yards per catch. I think it was a phenomenal fit for the quarterback there and Trevor Lawrence and how they found him the ball. And look, I just don't know what Travis Hunter is going to do in the offense, but at the same time, they drafted him so high. Are they going to force him the ball in short throws? And that just takes opportunities away from Brian Thomas.
That's what I'm thinking. It's a lot of throws at and behind the line of scrimmage like he did at Colorado. But, I mean, remember, their new head coach comes over from Tampa. And I don't think in his interviews, he has not said Thomas is just going to be the Mike Evans downfield guy. I think they're talking about manufacturing more slot opportunities for Thomas, which you wouldn't think of with his body type, but that would be great for him. I'm just not 100% sold that passing game can keep them both, super happy. I just have doubts.
Yeah, no, I get it. Looking at ADP again. So we're in that range. AJ Brown in a very similar range. Drake London just a hair behind them. Nico Collins. Again, Nico Collins is your guy, right? He's wide.
I love Nico Collins. Yeah.
Okay. Drake London. Drake London is in the tier 2. He's in the top 10 of. Now I'm getting lost in my place here. So Drake London he's number 9. He's in that tier of true wide receiver 1 candidates, as according to PFF. Would you put him in that tier with Nico and Brian Thomas and AJ Brown and those guys, or is Brian Thomas even in that tier for you?
Yes, but they're at the bottom of it. I like London a lot. His numbers with Penix, small sample size, were really good. He's clearly the alpha. I don't see Pitts or Mooney as that much competition. I just don't think he's got a ton of big play ability. He's not going to rip off the 70-yarder for you, and win your week for you. You know what I mean?
We're going to get through, 24 to 30-ish wide receivers here and how they are ranked. And I want to talk a little bit about the tier number 3 wide receivers here and where that break is for PFF, which is after all the names we've mentioned. So it's after the top 10 guys. And for Matt and I, it's Chase Jefferson, tier 1. Then it's Lamb, Puka, Malik Neighbors, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Nico Collins, AJ Brown, Brian Thomas Jr., Drake London. That's the top 10 wide receivers for fantasy this year. And, I think I like that name for tier 2 is true wide receiver 1 candidates.
Yeah.
High-end weekly starters is the name for tier 3, according to PFF.
Okay.
The first thing we got to do, I'm going to name some names. You tell me if they belong actually in your tier 2. Those names are as ranked by PFF in tier 3. Garrett Wilson, Ladd McConkey, Marvin Harrison Jr., T. Higgins, Rashee Rice, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Terry McLaurin, Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill.
The name that jumps off the page there to me that isn't like the others, that it should be higher, it might shock people, but it's Rashee Rice. Because I think he was like fantasy wide receiver 2 or 3 when he got injured last year. And like Kelsey's numbers were terrible when Rice was healthy. Worthy was just a downfield guy. Like there's a lot of proof from last year's tape that when he's on the field, he is clearly the number one option, and Worthy becomes the field stretcher. Kelsey becomes an afterthought. He does a lot of the Kelsey stuff, middle of the field. That I think a suspension is not going to happen. I think we know that officially. I don't think he's a great football player, but I think Mahomes is set up for a huge year, and I think he's clearly the number one target on a good offense.
Rashee Rice, okay.
Yeah, a little bit sneaky one.
Let me go back to the ADP then here on
Okay.
Rashee Rice and where he's at. Rashee Rice currently, did I miss him? Because I'm going down quite a bit. Let me go back to the top.
Some people are afraid of him because Worthy finished strong.
Here we go. So yeah, he's going just behind Jackson Smith and Jigba right now in fantasy leagues, and he is being drafted around 40. Where is it? 44 overall.
Okay, I'm definitely taking him in the third round in the 30s.
Yeah, there you go. Okay,
Yeah.
so Rashee Rice. Let's talk more about wide receiver 2s or potentially wide receiver 1s in those tier 3 range for your fantasy football leagues next. All right, so Matt likes Rashee Rice at the top of his tier 3 for fantasy football wide receivers this year. Some other candidates there that I just named. I'm going to go through those again. Tyreek Hill. How do we feel about Tyreek Hill? He's currently ranked wide receiver 20. Devontae Adams, wide receiver 19. Mike Evans. Like those are.
I want to focus on those three to start. They're the guys at the bottom because they're the old dudes.
Yeah.
I think I'm shying away from all. I'm not Adams. Adams goes back to my Rams conversation of I think those two wide receivers are going to get the ball a super high amount of time. So at ADP, I am in on Adams. I thought he played really well for the Jets as the season went on. Tyreek Hill could be wide receiver 1 again, and I think it definitely helps Waddle and Hill that Jonnu Smith got traded. I mean, Jonnu Smith got 88 balls last year. But Evans worries me a little bit. It felt like, well, I kind of know, and I understand it. That's not his fault. But at the end of the year, I felt like they were force-feeding Mike Evans so he could get his 1,000-yard streak alive. Kind of not because he earned the targets. They drafted a first-round receiver. McMillan's not a bad player. They just gave Godwin a ton of money. I'm not saying Evans has fallen off a cliff, but I think I'm letting someone else draft him. And I'm probably staying away from Tyreek, too.
The streak is over is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's at the end of this year, Yeah.
Well, who you drafted instead then? Is it you mentioned Rashee Rice, Jackson Smith and Jigba? I think I'm on an island with Jackson Smith and Jigba. I feel like his numbers are just a little bit inflated. Like I just don't see it talent-wise.
There's not a lot of big play.
And I think that's not that he's not talented, but
right.
Being like a dude, I just think he's kind of a number 2 guy. I'm talking about as a football player, as a fantasy guy, but I guess as a fantasy guy too. But I'm just like, I don't think there's more there. Like I think we've seen the maximum of him just getting targeted a lot, not high yards per catch. It's just I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong here, but and this is where I
tend to agree. I mean, good player. You wish he was on your favorite team. Chain mover, real good player. But maybe if DK Metcalf was still there, Metcalf would have the bigger year. I mean, like it's possible. You know what I mean? Like it wouldn't shock me if they drafted a receiver high next year to pair with them. It's more of a field stretcher.
So talk about wide receivers that are the number 2 on their own team, but a team that could just chuck the heck out of the ball, as we've mentioned already in this podcast, in the Bengals and the Rams. You like Devontae Adams or T. Higgins more?
Probably Adams. Higgins caught so many touchdowns last year, and I understand the Bengals are going to throw a lot of touchdowns. But Higgins and McLaurin are going to have a really tough time replicating their touchdown totals. Even though I've linked those two offenses together a lot. I think both their defenses are bad and both the offenses are awesome. But it's just hard to live off touchdown production in fantasy year after year. And I'm not sure Higgins or McLaurin can replicate that.
Tyreek Hill at his cost, I mean, he played all 17 games last year. I had to double check because it was like, man, 17 games, 17 starts of Tyreek Hill. It didn't even eclipse 1,000 yards on 123 targets.
I mean, they had quarterback issues. They had massive protection issues, so there was hardly any big plays. I mean, there was a lot of get it to Jonnu Smith quick. I don't know what I need to make a stand on Tyreek Hill at some point because he could burn you. I mean, if he's going like the 20th receiver overall, and he could be the number 1 receiver overall if everything hits, he's only really fighting Waddle for targets. And I think Tua is a good player and maybe even gets traded to a better team. So I've been hesitant to say I'm going to take him because I don't think he's done. I mean, I think just last week or something, he ran a great time at a track meet. It's not like he's slowing down, you know?
Yeah, and all year of a healthy Tua.
Yeah.
John Smith,
you know, right.
I just don't know if his name value is probably going to hurt where I would be able to draft him. I don't think he's going to get the discount that maybe you should think he would get. And I think he's ranked wide receiver 20, but he's not going to go wide receiver 20. And in fact, he's going wide receiver like 12.
Okay.
Still.
Yeah. I mean, I'm taking him. I'll definitely take him at 20.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
That's a 5th or 6th round.
I don't think people will let him fall.
I think you're 100% right. One thing I want to talk to you about on this tier, and they have them right next to each other. The 2 second-year guys, McConkey versus Harrison. I would much rather have McConkey, and I think he might be a better football player.
I mean, I don't know that I would go that far. They're so different. I just think for fantasy purposes, McConkey's just going to get more targets. So that's where you have to go. But again, I think McConkey's going to be drafted higher too. And I do think that there's some breakout potential for Marvin Harrison too. And actually his numbers were better than I thought last year. I thought he kind of laid an egg of a rookie season because of all the expectations. And he was still, he was not.
He was going the first round of fantasy drafts last year.
Yeah.
That which is a little nuts, right?
A little much. But he still had just under 900 receiving yards last year and 8 touchdowns on 116 targets. So I want the catch percentage to go up there, and then you need the target share to go up as well. But they have Trey McBride. They like to run the ball a lot. Is the target share ever going to be there? So for fantasy, I'm not sure, but I think he is going to be a proved to be a really good football player. And people are maybe expecting too much essentially from a rookie wide receiver last year.
So I'm stealing this from Matt Harmon, who does Reception Perception, because I just recently read the Marvin Harrison write-up. And as usual, Matt nailed it. They didn't do him many favors. He had to always do the hard work. He was always the X on the line of scrimmage, dealing with coverage ruled his way, never put him in motion, dealing with man coverage, never got him out of the slot or any layup throws. Will that change? I mean, you hope the coaching staff learns from their errors and says, let's get him more involved. Let's feature him. Let's move him around like CeeDee Lamb. But if they don't, it's a tough road,
Yeah, for fantasy purposes, I put him at the bottom of this tier, even if I put him in this tier, and definitely would have him below Ladd McConkey. PFF has him ranked 13 overall, Marvin. So they expect a breakout from Marvin Harrison Jr. this year. And the two guys ahead of him,
that price. Yeah,
the 2 guys ahead of him in this tier, Ladd McConkey. I'm in on that. I kind of like where he's at. I don't know if I would fight to get him at his current ADP. But this one, the other one is tough for me. Ranked number 11 is Garrett Wilson. I think there's a ton of opportunity for Garrett Wilson.
Yeah.
And I think he's a super talented guy. But we've seen the Justin Fields experience, and it's not good for fantasy wide receivers.
It's not good at all. Right. And DJ Moore had one decent year with Fields, but he also scored a ton of touchdowns that year. Wilson, besides Rodgers, has played with really bad quarterbacks, and I'm not saying Rodgers was great last year either, but he's gotten 1,000 yards every year. I mean, he's actually getting to that St. Brown consistent level too, and the target share is going to be high. I just don't think it's a very high ceiling.
Yeah, so I've had him almost every year on all my fantasy teams because I love Garrett Wilson. Like, essentially, I'm making T-shirts free Garrett Wilson because I just hate his situations that he's been in. Like,
yeah, I know.
Put him in LA with Matthew Stafford or something, right?
That's like McLaurin early in his career when he couldn't get a quarterback to play with, The
name we have not mentioned that is in this tier, 17th ranked according to PFF, is Terry McLaurin. He's another guy that he's a really good player. I don't know that there's more than what we saw. And so that's tough for me, Terry McLaurin. Like 80 catches, where is he at? 82 catches on 117 targets.
Bunch of touchdowns,
just under 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns. I mean, touchdowns will come down, right? And
8 or 9, probably
right around 1,000 yards. Yeah. I mean, that's solid. I expect him to be solid, but he's not going to go more than that.
And Debo's going to get some quick hitters, and there's a little more competition now. Might Jaden Daniels take a 3% step backwards?
Just a little plateau.
Right.
I mean, you want to dip before he figures it out and gets better at the end of the year, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know how that development path goes for quarterbacks.
So we'll talk about these guys next time we get around to wide receiver. But does DK Metcalf, Chris Olave, or Jalen Waddle interest you in this tier?
Right now, DK Metcalf does.
He's kind of like Garrett Wilson. He's going to get a ton of targets.
And he went from competing with Jackson Smith and Jigba to competing with
nobody.
Robert Woods? I don't know.
Right. Johnny Smith.
Right. He's the number 2 target guy on the Steelers right now.
I would have said Freiermuth 2 days ago, but now it might be Jonnu or Austin. Or I definitely know who number 1 is.
I think it's enough to move DK Metcalf from, if you had him in tier 4, say, to put him in the tier of guys we just talked about. And I mean, I wouldn't even bat an eye and look funny at someone in my fantasy league if they drafted him ahead of Evans, Adams, Hill,
Harrison,
Terry McLaurin. I mean, we talked about Terry McLaurin's ceiling. DK's ceiling's higher than Terry McLaurin's ceiling.
Yeah. I mean, the Arthur Smith offense, too, they throw a ton of deep balls.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's here to do. Rodgers is still good at that. There's going to be big plays. I think he's too low.
I like it. I totally agree. I'm trying to find him in the 55 overall is the ADP right now for DK Metcalf. Ranked
like the 5th round.
Yeah. I take him over DJ Moore's right next to him. I take him over DJ Moore because DJ Moore's the opposite. There's a ton of
Dunze could break out and be their best guy. Right.
Tons of competition for targets in Chicago.
Right. The Steelers would kill for an Dunze or a Burden,
Right. Absolutely. So the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about sleepers. Was there anybody else in that next tier that you thought should have gone in the tier above?
I haven't. I mean, at that price, I would definitely be interested in Olave and Waddle.
Yeah. Waddle's been in that tier.
Well, he lives in that tier. He was just injured last year. Right.
Right. So, Waddle, Metcalf.
And I think Olave is clearly the one on his team, but that could be a really bad offense.
Yeah, there you go. And then we'll start talking about guys who are maybe you have to pay a little bit of a price that might not be worth it. And, of course, sleepers coming up in Fantasy Wide Receiver Part 2 episode as we get an early look.
No show tomorrow, by the way, folks. Happy 4th. Yeah.
No show tomorrow. That Part 2 will not be tomorrow. It will be next week. And any of your topics that you want for shows as we get ready for camps to open in July, hit us up at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Drop a comment or a question on YouTube. Subscribe while you're there. And Matt and I back after the holiday weekend right here, Peacock and Williamson